A massive hello, guys. How are you damn well doing? This podcast episode with Ian Kerner today is nothing short of fantastic. He is the author of She Comes First. Be honest, you're not that into him either. He comes next, and the big sexy sex book. There's so many sex books. He's one of the world's best sex coaches. He does a whole bunch of TED Talks. You can YouTube and find them. And he's just come back from a couples retreat with Tony Robbins. So his credibility is world class. He's currently in New York, and we had a really awesome conversation. So I was very thankful he could make some time to jump on this podcast to have a chat to all of us. So essentially, guys, if you want to follow him or understand where he's at, all of these links are below. If you're interested in working with me, I've just released the program Overcome the Chaos, which essentially helps people to invest in themselves. It's basically a physical and mental makeover. There's an 8-week program which has everything in it. Just send me a message if you want to work with me or get started on that program. It is super transformational. We're getting people to normal standard and then skyrocketing all of their personal development results and business goals and personal goals and all the rest of it. It's quite fantastic. If you're interested in my recipe ebook, you want to get a bone broth discount, or you'd like to, see what else I have to offer in terms of coaching, you just check out the links below and follow them. If you like this podcast and you got any value from it, please give it a like, share, and subscribe. It really matters, and it really contributes to helping the podcast grow, especially Apple reviews. They are the best. So a huge thank you to you if you do that. And obviously this podcast is sponsored and brought to you by Eternum Labs, and you can use the discount code Corey, Corey, on the Eternum Labs website in order to get yourself a really good 10% off discount. So guys, without further ado, I'm going to give you this uninterrupted podcast with Ian Kerner. Honestly, get your phone ready, get a notepad and a pen ready. We all have stuff to do in terms of learning sex, learning relationships. We weren't taught, our parents don't teach us all the things and everything that we need to do in order to have really good relationships, develop as, develop with your partner, with your intimate relationship, increasing your ability for sex and how it can bring you guys together. And also our own relationship with our own sexual function and our own sexual organs and how we can actually control them, and the spiritual side of it and everything else like that. We get into the practical stuff and the spiritual stuff and the relationship stuff, and this podcast was amazing. Make sure you listen to it the whole way through. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you on the inside, guys. G'day, Ian. Thank you so much for coming on to the show. It's been a long time coming, and I'm super excited to have you on.
Hi, Corey. I'm happy to be here. I'm glad we could make this happen.
Yeah, me too. So what are some stuff recently that you have been working on, which is, got you a little bit excited?
A little bit excited. Well, I did. This has been a pretty big year for me. I'm 55, but it's a lot happened this year. First of all, I lost 50 pounds, right? So that was huge, being able to do that. And let me tell you, if we ever want to talk about diet, exercise, weight, sex, and self-esteem, I'm living it. The other cool things that happened were I published a new book called So Tell Me About the Last Time You Had Sex. And I've had a lot of fun being able to talk about it. I went to the TED conference this year. I just did some stuff with Tony Robbins. That was very inspiring. And so I've just been having a pretty fun year.
Oh, I love that so much. What were you doing with Tony Robbins? I'm a big fan of Tony.
Me too. He was doing a couples retreat. So, he gets up there and he does his thing, man, and nobody can do it like him in terms of just in the room transforming people's lives. But he really appreciates, different working with couples every day on sexuality stuff. Pretty interesting.
Nice. And what were some of the things that you were teaching and you were coaching?
Oh boy, what were some of the things that I was teaching and coaching? Well, we were talking a lot about the kinds of issues that come up for couples. We were talking a lot about desire discrepancy, when one partner's desire is, higher than the other, and mismatched libidos. We were talking a lot about male sexual function, things like early ejaculation and erectile unpredictability, and the extent to which kind of like organic, physical, biological factors versus psychological factors really affect sexual function. We talked a lot about the orgasm gap between men and women. And I asked the audience, I had couples there, and I asked them all, they were all ages actually, like 20s into their 70s. And I said, okay, so who of you in the room would prefer a good night's sleep to sex? And interestingly, I want to say like 75 to 80% of the women in the room raised their hand, women of all ages preferring sleep to sex. 0% of the men raised their hand. Maybe there was like one guy raising his hand. So there's such a discrepancy. And I was like, wow. So what's this about, ladies? Like, talk to me. What is this all about? I kind of already knew the answer. Like, of course you're going to hear like, oh, we do double shifts. We work during the day. We come home to a lot of work. Just the pressure on everyone these days, on women and childcare and whatnot. But the vast majority, they all said the same thing. The sex isn't worth it and the sleep is, because the sex isn't pleasurable enough, right? So that's where we really got into like the pleasure gap and the orgasm gap, because, you know, to be interested in sex, the sex has to be worth having. You got to be motivated.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to dive into the pleasure side of things.
Sure. What do you want to talk about? Ask me a question. Let's go.
So I'm not actually sure exactly what to say for the question, but in terms of everything that, like, because I know you've done like the most epic amount of research, and obviously losing 50 pounds right now, you're going crazy, having the best time of your life.
Yeah.
I would say
you got the plant-based version of me. Yeah,
the plant-based. Well, I like to go get into some of the raw stuff. So in terms of just pleasure, in terms of stuff that I think what'd be really interesting is probably just some of the most common things that people are unaware of or they don't know, for when either you teach or you talk about it, when people go, whoa, like I didn't know that. What are some of those things in terms of, one, motivating people to try and, be more pleasurable in sex? And then two, what are some of the things that like actually happen and work psychologically and physically?
Okay, well, why don't we start maybe with sort of the pleasure gap between men and women, and then maybe we can go to some male sexual function stuff and talk about psychology. It's interesting with the pleasure gap, especially in heterosexual couples between men and women. Studies show, and this is consistent with my practice, that so I wrote a book called So Tell Me About the Last Time You Had Sex. That was my most recent book, because I like to hear about sex in action as a sex therapist. I want to hear about a sexual event. I want to get in there. I want to dig and I want to deconstruct. When I ask that question to heterosexual couples, at least 95% will say intercourse. If I ask them to tell me about the last time they had sex. And if they weren't having intercourse, they wanted to, but something got in the way. So it's so intercourse based. And here's the thing, a lot of heterosexual couples, they get to the intercourse part very quickly, surprisingly quickly, like often within 5 minutes. Sometimes within 30 seconds, guys just have this belief, or they're expected to be like walking erection. So not only is there a big focus on intercourse, we're getting to intercourse very quickly. So that's a big problem, especially for women, because really the powerhouse of the female orgasm is the clitoris. And the clitoris is, a lot of it's on the surface of the vulva, sensitive nerve endings. There are internal structures that we can talk about. But the clitoris really responds to stimulation rather than penetration. In fact, there have been studies that have shown that because the glands of the clitoris, or the part of the clitoris that you can see above the vaginal entrance, there's a distance between the clitoris and the vaginal entrance, and it can be anywhere from 2 to 6 centimeters. And that distance, known as the clitorovaginal distance, has a huge impact on whether or not women are going to be able to have orgasms through intercourse. because the vast majority of intercourse-based positions, except really for women on top, really only intermittently or fail to stimulate the clitoris at all. So a lot of, and so that's actually why about 80% of women do not orgasm from intercourse alone, but 80% or more will orgasm from intercourse plus some kind of direct clitoral stimulation. So that's sort of the truth of the orgasm gap, and the fact that a lot of couples just don't talk about it. A lot of men feel a lot of pressure to go in there and really rock intercourse, and a lot of women sort of internalize that pressure as well and feel that they have to show up and have orgasms, and so if they're not, they're faking it. So there's also a lot of miscommunication or lack of communication that happens around that pleasure gap.
Yes. How do people get better at communicating? What are some of the things that they should be talking about?
Well, so, it's interesting, just on this for 1 second. If I'm working with my LGBTQ couples, if I'm working especially with gay men, there have been the same question. So tell me about the last time you had sex. Studies show that only 35% had intercourse the last time they had sex, right? So you have 65% of 95% of heterosexual couples sort of rushing to intercourse, and only 35% of gay male couples. And that's interesting to me, because what were they doing? What were the other 65% doing? They were engaging in what's called outer course, all the activities that don't count as intercourse, hugging, kissing, oral sex, manual stimulation of the genitals, rubbing, caressing, holding each other. What's fascinating, though, is gay men took 10 of these outer course behaviors, there's about 10 common behaviors, and they put them together in 1,300 different combinations. So that's 1,300 ways of just having pleasure, right, that are individualized and personalized. So I work a lot with heterosexual couples in terms of kind of breaking out of what I call the intercourse discourse and getting a lot more into, I think if you're a heterosexual guy and you really want to be pleasuring female partners, you got to get clitorate. You cannot be an ill-clitorate dude. You got to shift from an intercourse way of thinking to an outer course way of thinking. Intercourse is mainly good for one thing: procreative sex. There are few, if any, sensitive nerve endings inside the vaginal canal. What sensitive nerve endings are inside the vagina are within the first 2 to 3 inches, really the first 2 inches of the vaginal canal. And that's because the clitoris has internal structures that wrap around and kind of hug the vaginal canal. So even when people are saying that they're having vaginal orgasms or they love the feeling of intercourse, and I'm not saying that intercourse doesn't feel good, it feels great, especially for guys, and it can feel great for women too, but that great feeling comes from the vibration of the penis against the clitoral structures that are there internally, right? So it's through the vaginal walls, the clitoris is being stimulated. So the one main thing that I focus on a lot of guys with, again, is if you have a female partner and you want mutual pleasure, you got to get clitorate in a big way.
Wow. And what about like verbal communication?
What about it?
So how does that play a role in like, so what are some of the techniques or the things that you use or encourage people to get over psychologically in order to?
I think, first of all, we have to recognize that, sex is a very vulnerable topic because we don't grow up talking about sex, and we don't really talk to our parents about it. We don't see it, modeled in a healthy way. Many of us grew up in sex negative homes where we were socialized to experience shame around sex, or sex avoidant homes where it just wasn't talked about at all. So the first thing we have to respect is that, unlike most topics in life that we can talk about, we don't have the experience or the vulnerability talking about sex. And sex is also very likely to trigger shame. So, we just have to be respectful that it's a sensitive topic. We have to create emotional safety around the topic of sex so that we really invite our partners in to be vulnerable. That's one part of sexual communication, is just creating that emotional safety. I always tell my patients that come in, because having a sex problem is a little like having a toothache, right? By the time you get to the dentist, or you get to me, a sex therapist, you just want to get out of pain. So I focus a lot on helping couples sort of get out of pain. And the first thing that couples or individuals really present to me is the problem that they're having, or the complaint that they're having. He or she is never into it. Why am I always into it? Why am I always the one that's going up to bat and getting rejected? Or why no romance? Why no foreplay? Why no oral sex? What's the problem here, right? People come in and they're really ready to complain and criticize their partners. So I always focus, it's pretty simple. I mean, this works in all aspects of life. Take your problem and know the solution. Figure out the solution, right? You know what the problem is. Can you imagine the solution? And I'll often ask somebody to help them along. I'll say, so if we're going to work together, we're going to see each other every couple of weeks with homework in between. And let's just say in a couple of months, not long at all, right? Like, hey, like you're working on your body, you get results, right? You can get them. Work on your sex life, you're going to get results quickly too. If you were getting those results, or a fly on the wall, what would I see in terms of sex looking better than it is today, and helping to solve the problem? And that's where I really get couples to sort of reframe the negative into the positive and start to talk about, whether it's the kissing, the romance, the oral sex, the sort of just melting and merging into each other that happens with pleasure and arousal. So I'll start to hear about the solution. Now, the thing about sexual language, it's interesting because we have language for so many other topics. We can talk about, you name it, real estate, family, shopping list. We don't have a lot of language for sex, but when we do use sexual language, it can be sexy. It can create physiological response in the body. Sometimes when I'm doing a sex therapy session with couples, I can feel the heat in the room rising, because these guys are getting psyched about the sex that they're going to go have when they get home. So all of a sudden you came in, you were thinking about a problem, you were focused on a problem, you couldn't get ahead of that problem, you couldn't get in front of it. Then you thought of a solution, and then you kind of turned it into a fantasy by really putting some skin on it, and putting some meat around that solution. And it was sexy. That's how you talk about sex. You figure out your solutions and you make talking about sex sexy.
So, question, have you got a story? I'd love to hear about a time where something that like really sort of lit you up when you helped, say, person A go through a session and help them, or a couple, get results. Is there any that sort of stick out to you when you were like, okay, they with the problems, these are some of the things that we helped talk through, and these are the results and how they felt about it?
It's a tough question because I see 5 couples a day usually, or 5 individuals. And so figure 25 folks a week, and things tend to blur together. I mean, everybody is fascinating. Everybody can be interesting. I mean, there's a common set of problems that people have that we mentioned, desire and function issues, but everyone's dealing with, those issues in such unique ways. And so I feel like I'm having epiphanies and catharsis and really digging in there in almost every session. Some of the things that I've really been, helping couples with lately, here in the States, more and more heterosexual couples that have been in relationships and find that they're not so sexually compatible and they've really tried to make it work are sort of opting for some kind of consensual non-monogamy instead of cheating or getting divorced. So, that's been kind of fascinating work. Look, in the LGBTQ community, non-monogamy is much more common. But in the heterosexual community, you're sort of you're signing up, you believe, for life with your soulmate, and you're having these big weddings, and there's so much. It's just reinforcing, one partner for life. And so I find that working with couples around consensual non-monogamy is pretty fascinating work, because they're really having to deconstruct a lot of their ideas about what it means to be in a relationship and what it really means to love somebody. So that's been really interesting lately. More and more, I'm seeing. How old are you, Corey? Do you mind my asking on this podcast?
Almost 30.
Almost 30. So you're a young guy. I'm seeing more guys your age and younger than you, 20s down to college students, even teenagers that I work with, who are all suffering from erectile unpredictability or erectile disorder. And it's totally of a psychological nature, because these guys can wake up with erections. These guys can sit down to masturbate at home and get erections. But then when they are with a partner, they can't perform. And so I'm finding more and more cases of, we can call it erectile unpredictability, erectile variability, erectile dysfunction, but really of a psychological nature. And so that's been fascinating me. Why are so many men older than you, but especially so many men younger than you, who are in tip-top shape? Why are they having so many issues with erectile problems?
What do you think it is, and how do you help them get over it?
Do you have any ideas? I'll tell you what I think. I'm wondering, but you see a lot of men, and you're a fit guy, and what do you think's going on?
All right, so here's like my absolutely unsolicited opinion. One, it could be like a health factor, like essentially they're just not eating too much, or the other one is honestly just putting a lot of pressure on themselves, being too stressed, mm-hmm. and when they get to the position or get into that situation with all the stress in general physiologically, and then like the stress to perform because I want to either keep a girl or pleasure a girl, the next minute just and then you work yourself up, and then you're like, oh no, this can't happen.
I agree with that. I think it is all about performance anxiety. But what do you think it's about this era? Because I'm definitely seeing an increase in this. Like, what do you think it is about this era or your generation of men that are experiencing, such higher degrees of a kind of pressure that's inhibiting their ability to perform?
Oh man, I'd say porn or social media. If you look at beautiful girls and stuff, and you're to me looking at all these like beautiful people and stuff on Instagram, and you have an attachment to that, I assume that may play a role. And then probably watching too much porn and having unrealistic expectations of what you're supposed to be seeing in an intimate experience, and not being able to perform, and comparing yourself to porn stars who have massive penises and do all these different things that you're seeing online, and then you're thinking, oh god, like I've got to make her do all of these things that the porn stars are acting, and I've got no idea how to do it. I'm assuming that could be one.
I think it's interesting. So do you think? Because listen, there was I forgot, it was in Canada. Some researchers wanted to do a study of men who didn't use porn to masturbate, and they couldn't do the study because they couldn't find any men who didn't watch porn. So let's just be honest here. Like, for whatever high percentage you want, men are watching porn. I'm actually pretty porn positive. I'm really it's really just erotic visual stimuli. The problem with it is if it's not created, right? If the actors there isn't the proper consent, the proper consent is on the set. But if everybody sort of treated well, it's like that cup of fair trade coffee, and it's $3 that cup of coffee, but it was made really well. So I'm all about like ethical, fair trade porn. So I think you're right. I mean, I think it's got to be something about porn because I mean, I didn't grow up in a generation of, internet porn. And I can tell you a lot of the guys my age, I'm 55 now, didn't start having erectile issues. Well, a lot of them haven't started having them yet, even. So it's definitely got something to do with porn. So do you think that men of your generation can't differentiate between real sex and porn sex? Like look at porn and actually say, that's how it's supposed to go. That's how I'm supposed to be. I mean, I watch professional wrestling. I never think for a second that that's like what real wrestling is. So this idea that porn creates these high expectations, do you think that really, basically what you're saying is then that guys of sort of your generation, sorry about you hear the New York sirens in the background.
Oh yeah, New York, but it's not too bad.
So basically what you're saying is that guys of your generation either don't know the difference between real sex and porn sex, or somehow believe that the women that they're having sex with don't know the difference between real sex and porn sex and are expecting or wanting porn sex.
Yeah, I'm not sure because like I grew up with it. I remember being like 7 years old and getting it up on the computer and being like, "Wow, naked girls, this is fantastic." But like I actually quit porn like a year and a half ago, and it's been one of the best things just for myself personally, just because of, as you mentioned, the fair trade ethical porn is probably the way to go. But in terms of just myself, like personally, it never sought out the ethical fair trade porn, that's for sure. So man, I'm not 100% sure, eh? Growing up with this very differently, but obviously
hold on, you're glitching out a little bit. I don't know if that's on my end or your end.
Could be my end. Are we back now?
Yeah, we're back. It's showing that your signal is a little down. You have 2 bars as opposed to full bars. I don't know how I look on your end.
Oh, damn, it looks like it says I got full bars here, so still good. I'll just edit.
Okay, I got full bars now again. All right. You were saying, so you quit porn a year and a half ago, Corey, and one of the reasons was you didn't feel it was being ethically created. What have the benefits been for you? I mean, was that the only reason you quit, or what were the other, or why, and what were the other benefits?
So one of the reasons I actually quit, like myself, was masturbating and porn, like a year and a half ago. Mainly because I looked into a lot of research with John Gray, Mantak Chia, and some other people, and talked about the positive benefits of honing your masculine energy and then using it for creative energy to, be more abundant. And at the same time, I was going through like a breakup at that time. And I found out like the sadder I was masturbating for like comfort reasons. And especially towards the end of a relationship, I was using it for like a little bit of a release. So I just said to myself, other people, when I'm most focused is when I'm celibate and I'm creating and I'm getting a lot of stuff done. So for now, I just want to quit it because one of the main motivating reasons was, getting into my like early 30s and starting to get to 30, like I do want to find a partner. And for me personally, my relationship with masturbating was every time I masturbated, I would feel less motivated and had less drive to go and meet or talk to someone. So now that that's gone, I don't have that problem. And I'm a lot like the sexual partners that I choose are a lot higher quality than what they were previously I would talk to. And it's been like kind of quite fantastic, to be honest. And it's really helped me like overcome a few things, more focused and more drive to find a higher quality girl and to actually look for a future partner as well. But that was just my own personal experience.
Yeah. Hey, no, this is all personal and subjective. Yeah. I'm always not, I'm extremely non-judgmental, and I find it interesting. I mean, one thing I will say is someone who's now been around the block and found their, I have the love of my life. I've been married for 20 years. Actually, this is going to be my 20th anniversary, December 1st. We've been together for about 23 years. And, there's stuff that happens in the life cycle, like pregnancy and babies. There's a lot, or illness or travel. There's a lot that gets in the way of sometimes having, face-to-face actual sex. And so I have found sometimes, or just having libido imbalances for whatever reason. I found that masturbation and partnered sex can coexist, and that sometimes taking responsibility for your own sexuality as opposed to always expecting your partner to sort of be like an orgasm object for you can be useful. You talked about sort of porn providing a release. My personal view is that that kind of release can be healthy. Doesn't have to be unhealthy, right? Like, we all have coping mechanisms, and coping mechanisms aren't automatically negative. In fact, they could be automatically positive, right? Like, if you said, I run 5 miles every day to relieve stress, I'm going to assume you think of that as a healthy coping mechanism, right? Or I walk, or I have even 1 glass of wine a day, and I relax and, talk to my family. Like, there's so much that you're going to say is healthy, right? That you do. That could become unhealthy, right? You could destroy your body running. You could become an alcoholic, right? So there's a real difference between healthy and unhealthy. And I think that masturbation falls into that same category. I mean, I think it can be a terrific stress reliever when you need a stress reliever. I think it can be a way of taking responsibility for your sexuality, or I think it can become a negative coping mechanism or a maladaptive coping mechanism if you're using it to escape. If you're using it to escape an issue like depression or anxiety or some kind of fear, if you're using it to escape the intimacy of relationships because you're afraid of intimacy because you have an attachment style or something of the like that's pulling you away from intimacy. If you're using masturbation to compensate for the fact that the way you are having sex isn't authentically true to your sexuality, like you have some kind of erotic conflict, like you're gay but you're married in a heterosexual relationship, and your only outlet then for your sexual identity or your orientation is masturbation. So I think that there are absolutely unhealthy uses and healthy. So I kind of, I don't judge it. I'm always just curious about people's approach. I think coming back to the guys of your generation, I think that porn does play a role. To me, the role is a little more straightforward than, I've gotten so used to like visual novelty of beautiful women or these expectations. I think that masturbation and porn is easy, right? It's just easy. You turn on some porn, you get an erection, you have an orgasm. It's whatever you want to see that day. It's like TV, Netflix, whatever I want to watch. There's nobody looking over my shoulder. It's completely private. I don't have to worry about pleasing anyone. So it's simple. And I think that sex with an actual person, although there's nothing that rivals that flesh-on-flesh connection, I think porn with an actual person is more complicated. You have to think more. You have to hold them in mind. You have to really get attuned and get into flow with another person. And that takes some work, some practice, and some time. So I think that masturbation is easy. And so that might be a good reason to take a masturbation break as well, just to embrace the complexity of actual real world sex. Anyway, interesting stuff. I'm always learning.
Yeah, and I think that's fantastic because just in my own personal experience, it has been like that. So the whole, when I do have sex, it's been like absolutely amazing. And it has been a lot more intimate, and it has been a lot more of me trying to learn how to communicate better and how to, be a better, relationship person within sex, be a better partner in intimacy. Mm-hmm. So thanks for saying that and clarifying that. So it makes so much sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I would just say one last thing on that is like, okay, I know, we're having this like is it transatlantic? Is this a transatlantic conversation or a transcontinental conversation? I don't know what it is, but if we're experiencing some glitches, that would be why. I would just encourage you, and listen, you're your own guy, you got your own life. I would say like, doesn't have to be so black or white. It doesn't have to be so one way or the other, so extreme. I mean, maybe it's something that's benefited you and continues to benefit you, having total abstinence. But I would just, in general, I encourage people to kind of look at the gray and the in-between spaces of things.
Yeah.
So maybe one day there will be a role for masturbation again in your life.
Oh, there will for sure. And I'm definitely like, open to it and looking like sort of into it. And it's just been at the moment, it's been serving me well. So I'm like, I'm just going to ride this wave at the moment and see where it takes me. So yeah, thanks for clarifying that. And I 100% agree. It's amazing. So in terms of as well, because I was very interested in terms of people, just like to give people, some practical tools for who is listening. In terms of being able to get into a flow and increase, I guess, the pleasure and intimacy of sex, what do you think are some of the best, what would you encourage people to do? And
yeah, I mean, first of all, I think it's very important to sort of understand your desire framework, how you get turned on, but more importantly, it's also essential to understand a partner's desire framework. And two people do not always have the same desire framework. A lot of men, I'm sure a lot of the men that are listening to this fall into what we would call a spontaneous desire framework, right? Like my wife comes out of the shower, she's looking cute. Like I see that, it's like a slice of pizza I want to eat. I feel the hunger in my body and it's instant. Right? I don't even know. It's the impulse is ahead of even me recognizing it, right? That's called spontaneous desire. Now, my wife is in a different desire framework. She's in what we would call a responsive desire framework, right? So she sees me coming out of the shower, and look, I did lose 50 pounds. I look a lot better. So she might think like, hey, that guy's not so bad looking. He's still pretty sexy. So she can identify me as sexy. But that doesn't necessarily turn her on. It's not necessarily like that slice of pizza that she just needs to eat, right? So for a lot of people and for a lot of women, but for men too, they fall into what we would call a responsive desire framework. Desire needs to percolate, or it emerges from the percolation of arousal. You got to kind of warm things up. It's not an instant onset. And for people in a responsive desire framework, there's a really important correlation between inhibition, inhibitors, and turn-ons, exciters. It's kind of like a car that has an accelerator and a brake. For people in a responsive desire framework, if you're feeling a lot of stress, anxiety, you've got chores to do, you don't feel good in your own body, those are all stressors or inhibitors that get in the way of that desire emerging. Now, for someone in a spontaneous desire framework, they're going to have a better chance of still experiencing desire and getting turned on, even in the face of stressors, right? It can be a fire in the building and a guy saying, well, maybe it's just a fire alarm. Who knows? Come on, we could still do it. I smell smoke, but smoke takes 2 or 3 minutes to get going as a flame. We could do this, right? So we're not always as necessarily vulnerable to stressors. So it's important to create a shared desire framework, right? And to understand what your partner needs so that you're not one of these guys that just walks around saying, oh, why is my partner not into sex? Why do I always have to, initiate? Well, your partner probably is into sex, but maybe your partner doesn't initiate. Maybe you need to initiate. Maybe you need to be the match, the spontaneous match, to sort of start kindling that responsive sort of flame a little bit. So one thing I would say is definitely think about the desire framework that you want to create. The second thing that I would say to focus on is that too many people do not generate enough mind-based arousal in their sex lives, or what we would call psychogenic arousal. What do I mean by that? Well, it's been studied. There are women who can fantasize their way to orgasms. And there have been studies that show that women fantasize much more during sex than men, not because they're bored, but because that mind-based stimulation is helping them to get aroused. Men, I can ask a guy to go home if I'm wondering about his erectile issues and if they're organic or psychological, and I can say, The next time you sit down to masturbate, well, I couldn't give you this assignment, Corey, but the next time you sit down to masturbate and the next time you turn on some porn, keep your hands at your side and just tell me what happens. Just keep your hands at your side. Those guys will come back and say within 3 to 4 minutes they had good, solid working erections. And if they touched themselves even a little bit, they were ready to go. That's all the power of mind-based arousal, right? So why aren't we sharing more of that with ourselves? Why aren't we engaging in what I call more face-to-face arousal, talking to each other, commenting on the sex we're having, sharing a fantasy, engaging in some kind of fun kind of little role play? It doesn't even have to have costumes. I mean, we live in such egalitarian relationships where everything is always so equal that role play could even be, I'm going to be a man, like I'm going to be a traditional man and you're going to be a traditional woman, right? Because like egalitarianism doesn't always work so great for sex, right? When it comes to sex, sometimes we want to be objectified. We want to be eroticized. We want to feel that someone desires us so much they can't keep their hands off of us. So I'm big on all of that face-to-face arousal. And for a lot of couples who can't get there in the beginning, I tell them to focus on a side-by-side experience, like watching some ethical porn together, reading some literary erotica together, listening to an erotica podcast. There's so much great content out there, and there's nothing wrong with kind of getting in bed and having a new arousal runway into sex that's more psychologically oriented. So 1, know your partner's desire framework. 2, focus on psychological arousal. 3, extend and expand the sexual experience. And that means get into an outer course way of thinking about sex, right? Enjoy the kissing, the manual, the oral, the mutual touching, all of that. Don't just let one behavior, a penis and a vagina, define your sex life and everything about your sex life. So get into that outer course, right? And get your arousal arcs synchronized, right? Build arousal for each other. Really, really get it going, right? And here's the other thing. So that would be tip number 3, right? So tip number 1 was desire frameworks. Tip number 2 was psychological arousal. Tip number 3 was outer course. Tip number 4 is about sex isn't just about turning on, it's also about turning off, right? So let me explain that. So sex, of course, it's like we do want some novelty. We do want some newness. We do want some excitement and some unpredictability and some mystery. And that's great. But at a certain point when we're having sex, we sort of need to go into a kind of autopilot phase or into a flow phase. We need to get out of our heads. And if we're working on something new, if we're trying something novel, inherently we're asking our brains to learn something. The learning can be a lot of fun, but it's still using our brains in a way in which we can't completely let go. So at a certain point during sex, you really need to just kind of let go, let yourself get into flow. There's a lot of studies that talk about this concept of entrainment and rhythmic entrainment. There are, studies, if you put 2 pendulum clocks on the wall and you start them off and they're out of sync, those pendulums, within about 20 minutes, they get in sync, right? How does that happen? How does something go moving at the same velocity from out of sync to in sync, right? Well, they're getting entrained by starting to oscillate at the same frequencies, the same sound frequencies, right? So it's the same with our nervous systems, getting our nervous systems to sort of operate and flow with each other. Look, this happens. You can be pushing a child on a swing. You can be throwing a ball. You can be washing dishes with someone, dancing with someone, playing music. The activities that I'm talking about, though, now all have a common denominator of rhythm in some way. Literally physical rhythm helping to lead into that kind of flow state. That's where you want to get with sex too, right? Whether it's through outer course or through intercourse. You want to have that rhythmic entrainment that's bringing you into flow. So tip number one, let me see if I can remember all these. I wasn't planning to do this. Tip number one was know your desire framework. Tip number two was psychogenic arousal. Tip number three was more outer course. Tip number four was don't just turn on, turn off. And let's go for five, because five is always a nice number. So you could say the top five. I'm going to say, in the moments after sex, do not reach for your iPhone, right? Do not just get up and go. When I work with people who are sort of more into the BDSM lifestyle, or they're it's not a lifestyle, I don't know why it's. If you're more into BDSM play and you're planning a scene and you're saying to your partner, oh, this is what we're going to do. It's going to be so fun. I'm going to tie you up and we're going to be pretending to do this. And, but it's going to be an intense scene, right? So there's studies that show that for BDSM participants, there's something called the sub drop, where when the scene is over, there's a real down rush of endorphins. All the endorphins that came up sort of go down. And that can really trigger emotion, can trigger sadness. And so BDSM partners often come up with what they call an aftercare plan. Oh, well, don't worry. When you're in your sub drop, I'm going to cuddle you. Or I'm going to bring you a glass of wine. Or we're just going to get under blankets together. We're going to go take a nice walk. And so that's all planning the after moments, right? And I think regardless of whether you're into BDSM or just a heterosexual couple, whatever it is, whoever you are, think about the moments after too. And in the spirit of a baker's dozen, we're not going to do 13, but 6 as opposed to 5 tips. The sixth one was, don't forget about that space between sexual events, what I call the erotic thread. Sex shouldn't just be showing up for sex, and that's the only time we allow ourselves to really show our sexual selves to each other, right? Just as I can be with my wife and I can go from making lunch to the kids to watching TV to talking about something, right? All going to work, all these different, or being a mom or a son or a brother or sister, all of these different parts show themselves every day in our lives. Why don't our sexual selves show themselves? Doesn't mean they have to run into bed and go have orgasms, but just letting your sexual selves connect. 30 seconds before you're headed out to work, keep what I call the erotic thread between sexual events going. So those were my top 6, I guess.
Wow, that was fantastic. I was so just listening so intently just then to all those. That was absolutely amazing. What do you think, just as a question, thank you for saying all of those and giving those tips there. I love the different frameworks and the language that you use, because being able to have those words and those tools there, I think would be awesome, especially if anyone who's listening. I think for in their relationships, if they bring up any of those things and to talk about them, I think that would just help so greatly. And how do you think the importance of knowing all of this improves the quality of someone's life?
I think knowing all of this stuff about sex, like knowing anything, gives you knowledge that you can translate into behavior and action. I don't know any other activity other than sex where we think we should be automatically good at it, or it should be totally organic and natural. I don't know any other activity that's so relevant to life that we don't think we should need to talk about, that we should just instantly know, right? What activity ever are you going to be masterful at without any work or practice or experience of it? So I think any knowledge that you gain, any communication that you have is incredibly insightful and leads to action. The other thing that I think is important is so many of us have sexual issues, right? I wrote a book called She Comes First about 20 years ago. It's still quite popular here in the States. And it began with my own struggles with early ejaculation, right? So I had to know that about myself. I had to own that about myself. And I had to stop trying to just have sex one way that was emphasizing my issue, right? So I had to like embrace my problem and think about new approaches. So that was all information based. I had to learn about myself. I had to learn about the issue. I had to accept it. I had to become cliterate and understand different ways of being with a partner that weren't so penis dependent, right? So I couldn't have done that without knowledge. And in fact, Corey, I grew up without knowledge. I grew up in the late, I came of age in the 1970s and in the 1980s. I was your age in 30 in 1996. So I was like 20 at 1986. So there was no internet when I was 20 years old. There was no Men's Health magazine. There was no Corey Boutwell. Is that how you pronounce your name?
That's how you pronounce it. Boutwell. Yeah, you got it.
There was no Corey Boutwell podcast to illuminate me and enlighten me. There's fucking nothing out there, right? So I didn't have any information. And that was rough. That was rough having
That does sound rough, man.
So that's why having some knowledge is helpful.
Yeah, I love that so much. Thanks for sharing. How did you, in terms of, because I'd love to talk about the whole erectile dysfunction thing as well with guys in terms of, the premature ejaculation and the ejaculation things is how you got into writing that book. What are some of the, like in a short way, what are some of the solutions, or you could say things to challenge people to either talk, look, I was going to say look and research on, and obviously the logical answer is to read your book, like She Comes First. But yeah, what are some of the things where people can sort of go to look at? Because I know that there'd be some girls maybe listening to this who would be like, I think my partner could go with a little bit of hand listening to that. And there's probably some guys like, yeah, well, I'd love to pick that up.
So early ejaculation is probably the most common problem that men of all ages deal with, even more so than erectile impairment. Now, part of the issue is how long is long? Like, how long are you expecting to have sex? Are you ejaculating early because you're lasting for 10 minutes and you want to go for 15 minutes? Or are you lasting, for under a minute, which is more of the clinical definition of early ejaculation? And I think that's kind of the sex that a lot of women complain about, because most women don't actually want to have, I'm not trying to speak for women, but just studies average event is usually about 7 to 10 minutes, just that part of it. So what can you do if you have early ejaculation, or if your partner has early ejaculation? Well, first of all, debunk fact from fiction, right? It's not that you're a guy, or that you're sexually immature or sexually selfish or sexually narcissistic. It's not that you masturbated so much in one way that you can't unwire yourself. Early ejaculation is actually both genetic and neurochemical. The reason we know it's neurochemically based is because one of the best ways of treating it is with a low dose of an SSRI, a medication. Here we call it like Prozac, Lexapro, Zoloft. I don't know if those are the brands in Australia that are used to treat depression and anxiety, but those medications have the side effect of delay in ejaculation. And that can be a very deleterious, very negative side effect for a lot of guys. But if you're a guy with early ejaculation, that's actually the side effect you're looking for, is to have delayed ejaculation. So that's why we know it's neurochemical, because we know by raising serotonin levels and decreasing dopamine levels, it starts to increase what's called the ejaculatory latency time. So that's one thing that you could do that would be a pharmacological intervention. The other thing that's sort of pharmacological that doesn't involve as much of a prescription, although it's very easy these days to get an SSRI. I don't know if you have sites like for Hims or Get Roman or whatnot, these sort of concierge men's sites that are now doing telehealth and packaging solutions. There's also numbing agents or numbing sprays or numbing wipes that come in various forms that are treated with a little bit of lidocaine and sort of desensitize the penis somewhat. And so that can be extremely helpful. A third thing that can be very helpful is shift your sex script to an outer course-based sex script. I would argue that if you could both have orgasms, if I'm a woman and it's like my guy is coming too quickly and I'm not having orgasms, that really sucks. And I'm going to start to resent that guy. I'm going to hope that this gets fixed because I want to enjoy sex too. I want to have orgasms too. Now, if me and that guy engage in a really fantastic outer course based script, if we can really kiss and talk and touch and caress and be romantic and have manual stimulation and maybe some oral stimulation, we could bring in a sex toy and we could get really clitorid about the sex that we're having. Then when we're that much closer to orgasm, we can transition into an intercourse position like Woman on Top that provides a lot of clitoral stimulation, and we can still have intercourse and have orgasms. We're just creating much more of an outer course-based runway to get there. Something else, a masturbation exercise that I give to men, basically ejaculation is a two-part process. There's a phase in which semen, sperm enter into the penis, and then there is the expelling of that sperm, the ejaculation, right? So it's two parts. It's sort of like loading a gun and firing a gun. But they happen very quickly, and so they feel like one process. So if you can decouple those two stages, for example, masturbating yourself to the point where you're starting, where you reach that, almost that point of ejaculatory inevitability, where you're like right there at the orgasmic contraction. Maybe you even got pre-cum is coming out of your penis, but you haven't fully ejaculated, and you stop yourself, right? Your brain told itself, wait, your brain told itself, this guy is having an ejaculation, right? As soon as that sperm loads, this guy's having an ejaculation. Let's prepare to release blood out of the penis and go back into a pre-aroused state because we're going to be done, right? But then the brain catches itself and says, wait a second, I'm putting all these different signals together. Red alert, this guy did not actually ejaculate. Stop that blood from going out of the penis, hold that blood, and let's keep working ourselves up again. So basically what you start to do is it's really edging, but it's really edging real close. And then allowing yourself to cycle back in the arousal process and continuing to ride that sort of smaller arc. Partnered sex. So those are sort of my tips for early ejaculation.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that the willpower must be so strong for the men in that position. I wasn't going to ask this question, but it just got me super curious because I just really want to know what really lights you up personally in terms of, having some of the best, and I hope you don't mind sharing. It's what are some of your experiences that have really supercharged your sex life that you think's just been amazing?
Well, a lot of the 5 or 6 tips that I gave, I was able to give those tips because they honestly come out of my own life, my own relationship, and I try and put them all into practice from the desire framework straight through to the after moments. I don't always succeed as well as I'd like. I think the other thing that I noticed is just since I really lost weight, it's had a huge... it's just been a huge boost. I mean, I don't know if it's because I have higher self-esteem, I have a waist size that I feel sexier in, and I certainly seem to have more energy, and I'm just carrying less weight, and I'm less fatigued or out of breath, So I think certainly I would say I don't exercise a ton, Corey. I know you look like you exercise a lot. I actually look like I exercise too now, but I don't really, other than walking. I walk about 4 or 5 miles a day just around New York City. I'm trying to do some push-ups. So I can't claim exercise, but I can claim diet, walking, feeling good in my body, feeling good in my life, having a job that I enjoy doing. And if I didn't have a job that I enjoyed doing, I would find other things that I enjoyed doing to give me a sense of validation and self-esteem. So much of sex is about what's happening outside of the bedroom.
Yeah, so true. And Ian, I just want to say you are an absolute stud. Thank you for doing all this and learning all these things and, sharing this awesome message with the world and doing all the research. And I think your personality works really well for what you do. You're like a really great person who's very easy to listen to. So thank you so much for that. And I have quite a few questions that I want to ask you, but might have to get you on for round 2 sometime in the future because
I got a patient coming.
Yeah. You got a patient out of me. Oh God, help me start masturbating again. So, oh man, thank you so much for coming on and sharing everything. For everyone who's listening, where would be the best place to find you or, get up your
just my website, iankerner.com.
Sweet. And then I'm sure all your books are pretty much on Amazon because I see them every time I go on there and look at some sort of relationship book. Yours are always the top of the list.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, everything's on Amazon. I like the new book is my favorite. So tell me about the last time you had sex. I put a lot of work and thinking into that. So that's the one I'd really recommend.
Awesome. And thank you so much for coming onto the show.
All right. Catch you later, Corey.
See ya. Woo! And that was awesome, man. We did it. Oh, that was so